But I believe that by overwhelming majority in all the Americas, you and I, in the long run, and if it be necessary, you and I will act together to protect, to defend, by every means at our command.
You're listening to the History in Motion podcast, where history comes alive through the eyes of the people who lived it. In each episode, we follow one life, one set of choices, and the world those choices helped shape. Few revolutionaries have burned as brightly or as fell as hard as Simón Bolívar, the liberator who shattered an empire and tried to unite a continent. Born into privilege, Bolívar became the voice of freedom. In Spanish America, driven by Enlightenment ideals and a relentless will to fight. In this episode of the History in Motion podcast, we trace his rise, his victories, and the dream that slipped through his fingers.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the History in Motion podcast, where today we are continuing our journey into Venezuelan and the grander Latin American independence movement in South America. And this is the person that we were teasing last week. We were saying this is going to be the big one, the one that people know a lot about, and that's Simón Bolívar. So we're picking up our episode last time on Francisco de Miranda, who really set the seeds for this revolution, but it needs someone who's actually going to go take it to fruition, and that is the famous Simón Bolívar.
Yeah, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to that episode, I think it definitely provides some great pretext to what we're about to talk, on Bolívar, but just to get a lay of the land for this period of time. So again, we are talking about Spanish America in the 1700s. So this is a pretty vast empire. It's stretching from modern-day California to Argentina, and it's ruled from across the Atlantic by a very distant monarch in Madrid. The society itself is deeply hierarchical. Your status depends on your blood, your birthplace, and your skin, and we'll get a little bit into that later. The economy is locked under mercantilism. So essentially, colonies at this point exist to feed their counterparts in Europe. So in this case, it's going to be Spain. So essentially, trade's very restricted, wealth flows out, it doesn't flow in, and opportunity pretty much is strangled for most, other than maybe a few ruling elite families at the top of that social strata. So this is essentially economic extraction, cultural, social control, and it's very, very rigid. And it's wrapped up in the language of divine right, and it's enforced by the church, the crown, and then its colonial administrators. So this is just Spanish America we're talking about. In the broader context of things, this is very much the age of revolution. We have the American Revolution that's going to happen 1776, the French Revolution 1789, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but the Haitian Revolution. And I think we'll find a lot of themes that cut across all of these, but this is I feel like I say this a lot on a lot of our episodes, but it's a very dynamic period of time with a lot of things to consider. And this is the world that Bolívar is going to, grow up in and become the revolutionary that we know him for today.
Yeah, other than the fact that they all speak Spanish, and maybe Catholic, that's pretty much it. After that, these areas of, like you said, all the way from Mexico all the way down to modern day Argentina and Chile, very, very different places. And it's an important fact because, as we'll get into this, the concept of being Spanish versus Spanish American, two very different things. Not too different than what we see in the United States of America, but with its own flavor to it. So let's talk about Simón Bolívar. So he's born in Caracas, which is modern day Venezuela and the capital city of Venezuela, on July 24th, 1783. And he was born into a wealthy Creole family. So this is kind of that aristocratic level of Spanish Americans living in Venezuela, or born in Venezuela, I should say. But from a pretty early age, there's some loss in his life. He was actually orphaned by the age of 9, but he had a lot of wealth, which is helpful. But he also had this lack of guidance. There's people in his life who were trying to help him out, but he really was just kind of this unruly kid, kind of did whatever he wanted. Throughout his teens, people just saw him as very arrogant, not interested in anything. So he wasn't this super smart kid who for sure was destined to do great things. People really looked at him and said, this kid's just the typical kid with not much guidance in his life, spoiled rich kid, running around doing whatever he wanted. And he had a series of tutors and educators, and one of them was Simón Rodriguez, who was actually a radical disciple of Rousseau. And so this is where we start to see a little bit of those Enlightenment philosophical elements coming into his life. Bolivar definitely, not 100%, but probably rejected a lot of this just based on what we know as him as a kid. All over the place, not really grounded in anything. And so this is where, he gets to his about 16th year, so about 16 years old. And that's when he does the classic thing like Miranda did. Not so much in a military standpoint, but he goes to Europe and kind of looks to take that part of his life on. But really this childhood and this adolescence, I wouldn't say it's a mess, but it's just kind of nobody knows what's going to become of him, and definitely not someone who people are going to be like, this guy's going to do great things one day.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's such a quick shift to the rest of his life, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the changes that are happening on the ground in Spanish America. So we briefly touched on it in the Miranda episode, but there's these things called the Bourbon reforms, and it's happening from the late 1760s to the 1800s approximately. And essentially this is we'll call it a modernization program to kind of look at their empire more critically, to tighten imperial control. So they wanted to, centralize authority a bit more so they could boast colonial revenues. And, this is where the social hierarchy really comes into play. So they would place Spanish-born officials in key posts in Spanish America to reinforce these policies. And trade is obviously going to be confined to enrich the country of Spain by extracting resources out of Spanish America. And this is, kind of the overhauling that's happening within Spanish America, or the what Bolivar is leaving from to go to Europe.
Yeah, and you have to remember, Spain is not the powerhouse that it once was. So I'm sure 100 years earlier, when you had these Spanish administrators, if you will, coming over with a lot of support from Spain and, control of the Atlantic Ocean and a lot of money going back and forth. The people who have settled in these areas probably a little bit more recently from Spain, which definitely helps. But also there's we've got one of the most powerful countries in the world backing us. Of course, we're going to play ball. We want to be part of this. When we get into the 1800s, Spain is really declining a lot. And Bolivar sees right when he comes to Europe, he enters Madrid and it's in a deep recession. And one of the things that he really notices quickly, and so this is what I find interesting about Bolivar, definitely an unruly kid running around doing whatever he wants, but he's very observant. He sees right away that the monarchy, they're really trying their best to keep this illusion of wealth and prosperity. Not any different than what they were doing in France. They were bankrupt, but if we show that the crown's doing really well, everybody's going to be really happy. And so he sees this, and you can see this is going to put a bad taste in his mouth when it comes to the monarchy. But his time in Spain is actually really good for him. He finally gets some more of this stability in his life. And he's got tutors around him. He's got people in his life that are grounding him and teaching him and helping him move on in his life. And he gets to the point, too, where he's 18 in 1802, and he actually meets the love of his life, a girl named Maria Teresa Rodriguez del Toro, and they get married. And so he's only 18, and right away moves back to Venezuela. And if this had gone as planned, I think everything would have just been typical kid born in Venezuela, doing the aristocratic trip to Spain, finding a wife, going back to Caracas. But she dies less than a year later of yellow fever. And so he's devastated, and he vows not to remarry. So we'll see that with Bolivar. He loves to make a vow, and he does keep this vow to the rest of his life. He never remarries. But this is a really personal tragedy for him, obviously. So young, just got married, exciting new life, and these tropical diseases that get so many Europeans when they come to South America. It gets her so quickly that he's devastated. But he reflects on this because now he needs to go return to Europe to do a couple things. Mainly, he needs to go speak to her parents and tell them what happened. But it's an opportunity for him to explore life a little bit more. And he reflects on this and says, if this didn't happen, I probably would have been okay with just a normal life. I wouldn't have gone into politics. So, this unfortunate, devastating event probably has a really big impact on world history. Now, this is Bolivar saying that, I may not have done these things. You never know. He may have still done it anyways, but definitely a big, big impact on his life and potentially the history of South America.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, because does the story just end if she doesn't die of yellow fever? But I think to your earlier point, Paul, just about where is Spain right now? I know we just kind of glossed over it, but it's probably important to underpin. It is a country that is in financial trouble at this point. It has spent much of the 18th century fighting very expensive wars. You have the wars of the Spanish Succession. They're warring against Britain during the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution, and then obviously the Napoleonic Wars. So they're over dependent on the colonies at this point. And I'm sure that becomes somewhat obvious to Bolivar in terms of that greedy relationship, as he describes it later in his life, between the Spanish and its colonies in Spanish America. So I think, there's a lot of unrest and probably lack of stability in Spain at this point in time. So maybe that kind of added a little fuel to the fire of thinking what's possible when it came to independence.
Yeah, and even when he's in Spain now for the second time, he actually meets the future King Ferdinand VII, who's now just a prince, and he hates the guy. There's a story that they actually play tennis or some form of tennis against each other, but he just thinks this guy is arrogant and really dumb. And he's thinking in his head, like, this is the guy who's going to lead Spain, and me in the colonies, I'm going to have to bend my knee to this guy. I'm going to have to make sure that we're continuing to enrich his pockets. Absolutely not. And this is a very important point, because when he gets back to Venezuela and we start to see the battle between people who want to break away from the monarchy and those who want to stay, his head almost explodes to say, why do people like this guy? It's the image of the guy and it's what he represents. But for him, it's like not a personal hatred, but just a lack of respect, if you will, for him, and not understanding why anybody could really like this guy. But he stays in Europe for a little bit longer, and he sees a few different things happen. One, he's actually in Paris during the time of Napoleon's rise. And so as the story goes, Napoleon's coronation happens, the city is partying, the bells that are on the churches are going crazy, and it's a very exciting time. The way this story goes, at least, he says he closed his windows and did not participate in the celebration because he felt it was a departure from the liberal ideas of revolution. So he was definitely impressed by Napoleon, thought it was very interesting, but he hated the crowning himself of an emperor. He called it a miserable thing and a Gothic fancy. So it's interesting because we'll see where this story goes with Bolivar. He's very much a typical Enlightenment guy at this point, and he's really looking for liberalism in all shapes and forms, and he sees France, the exciting things that were happening, not so exciting as the French Revolution goes. But I think for him, he sees what's happened in France, and it's a sad end to what I think he thought was going to turn into some sort of more liberal society that he could potentially emulate in South America and specifically in Venezuela. But here, it's just what happens, I guess, in France. And it'll be something to think about when we come back to kind of the end of his life. The most important thing about all of this is Paris. There are salons everywhere where people are talking revolution. They're talking about the Enlightenment. They're talking about liberal ideas, especially now that things have calmed down after the revolution. And this is a great point for him for connections, ideas. And we'll see later in his life how he becomes actually a very good writer of these ideas and great at putting out these proclamations. And so you can definitely see that during this time in Paris kind of influences a lot of that stuff we're going to see later.
Yeah, I think he is kind of, I don't want to say typical, but we talk about an enlightened revolutionary leader. Some of those buzzwords always come to mind. He's going to champion liberty, equality, democracy. He's going to challenge the divine right order, challenge the church potentially. I think, again, it is very interesting because when we look at Miranda or other revolutionaries that we looked at as well, there is something about how these ideas take hold in some of these people and how they kind of latch on and ignite this kind of spark that allows them to keep going and really push to kind of change the direction of world history. And I think Bolivar, obviously, as anything about him, he definitely does change the trajectory of Spanish America.
Definitely. And like you said, this is the time of revolution. This is the time where all of this stuff is happening, and you can't walk 2 feet in a lot of these European cities without running into a revolutionary of some type. And yeah, he may seem like a dime a dozen there, but back in Venezuela, it's maybe not as popular, but a lot of these conversations are starting to happen. But before he leaves Europe, he has to make an oath. He has to make a proclamation. Not that he has to do it, but he ends up doing it, and it's just kind of a Bolivarian thing. So he continues to travel through Europe. He's getting into his early 20s now, and he's really reading a lot of writings coming from a lot of these great Enlightenment thinkers. But he makes his way to Rome in 1805. And on the heights of the Monte Sacro in Rome, Bolivar swears an oath where he says, "I swear before you that I will not rest body or soul until I have broken the chains binding us to the will of Spanish might." And so, like we said earlier, he keeps his word. That is exactly what he's going to do. And he does not give up on this until the day he dies. But I think he's a young guy going to make a proclamation. And now that others have heard it, friends have heard it, it'd be pretty embarrassing if he didn't try to keep this oath. So back to Venezuela he goes in 1807. So just as Napoleon's occupation of Spain the following year threw the Spanish Empire into chaos, this is a great opportunity because it's, again, that Spanish hold on Spanish America has changed. There's chaos, right? And the thing to remember here, just how information travels. It's not like Napoleon rolled into Spain, put his brother in charge, and then everyone in South America picked up the phone and was like, oh yeah, we got it, thanks. We'll make changes. This could take months, and probably did take months before this happened. And the way the information actually got to Venezuela was a Times of London newspaper arrives, is translated for the governor, and it says basically, yep, Spain is defeated, Napoleon has won, Joseph Bonaparte has been put on the throne. And he goes, that's just English propaganda. There's no way that any of that's true. Well, a few weeks later, some French ships roll in and go, yeah, it's true, and here's what's changing. And the governor goes, well, I've been had, and now, time to change, right? And this is a perfect opportunity. Take advantage of this turmoil if you're in Venezuela, because back in Spain, you have this new system that's kind of being set up called a junta, and it's these, I guess it's kind of like a midpoint between converting over to French rule and keeping the old Spanish rule. It's like these pods of, I guess, governments, if you will, that kind of control certain areas. And these are trying to be set up. But the big thing with them is they don't want to give Americans equal representation. They want to just say, we're the Spanish in the country, we're number one. Everybody down here, not as much representation. So very similar to in the United States of America, no taxation without representation. They want representation in this new junta system, and they're not getting it. And so with all this chaos, this is the opportunity that Bolivar and the other revolutionaries are going to take to create that first Venezuelan republic.
Yeah, it's like a chain reaction almost, right? News of the mother country collapsing kind of just spreads, and then it's kind of immediate. If there's no legitimate king on the throne, nobody's really ruling us. So you're going to have mostly elites in the cities from Caracas to Buenos Aires, and they're going to form the juntas or councils on their own. But it's funny how I was reading that in name, they were kind of set up to be, loyal to Ferdinand still, but in practice, it was really only a name, right? These are people aligning to protect their own self-interest and start exercising autonomous power. So even amongst the people who have, probably fared pretty well under colonialism, there's still this kind of desire and want to have total ownership and self-governance outside of the realm of the king.
Yeah, it's a theme that continues here of, can we keep things the way they are as long as they can, but throw in some reforms in some way? And this is an attempt to do it. There's a noble attempt in some areas, but at the end of the day, people like the way the colonial system was working. They like that being Spanish is your numero uno at the top. They don't want that to change. But the people in Venezuela don't care. There's enough freedom and chaos happening that they're actually able in 1810 to break away and declare autonomy from Spain, creating this first Venezuelan republic. And so one of the things that Bolivar does here is in Venezuela, and they actually dispatch him to London to seek British support and to meet with the star of last week's episode, Francisco de Miranda, and speak to him about returning and leading this struggle for independence. Like we talked about last time, Miranda is the face of Spanish American independence. That's all he's been talking about for decades, over 30 years, and he's ready to come back. And this is where he actually meets. He goes to Grafton Street, to Miranda's famous house. And actually, I was curious while I was looking this up, so I searched the address on Google Maps, and if you go to Street View, it's actually the Venezuelan consulate today, which is awesome because of course it is. Where else are you going to put the Venezuelan consulate in London? It's got to be on Grafton Street, and it's got to be where Miranda's house is. And there's actually a plaque up that says that he lived here for a number of years, which is kind of cool. So by 1811, their declaration of independence is official, and Bolivar is served as an officer in the army, and Miranda is back as well. But this has a very weak base of support. It has a lot of enemies in these conservative whites. Disenfranchised people as well aren't happy, and all of the Venezuelan provinces are not happy. So like we talked about last time, these Venezuelan provinces, they don't want to be ruled from Caracas. In their eyes, what's the difference? I was being ruled from Madrid. Now I'm being ruled from Caracas. I still don't have autonomy to do what I want. And so this is a big problem. We start to see rebellions in the city of Valencia and these other places. And just a quick reminder of this hierarchy. You have Peninsulares at the top. So these are Spaniards born in Spain who have these colonial administrative positions. They were strongly against this new republic. They, wanted things to go back to the way they were. They were loyal to the crown. Then you had the Criollos, the Spaniards born in Venezuela. This is where you have these wealthy landowners who they're the Patriot Republican movement. They're the leaders of this independent movement. So you got the top two are kind of against each other. But then as we go down the list here with the Mexitos, these are mixed European, indigenous ancestry, smaller landowners. They're divided. They leaned royalist, but they were more neutral. You have the Pardos, who are mixed African, indigenous, and European. ancestry, which also had free blacks, mulattoes, and some other people in there. They were sometimes royalists, but not all the time. You had indigenous people who were kind of neutral, kind of doing their own thing because they were a little bit more independent or semi-autonomous, if you will. And then you had enslaved Africans. So again, neutral, but then Miranda's trying to sway them with freedom if they sign up for the Republican Army. So the big thing to remember here, this is not Spain versus people in Spanish America, specifically in Venezuela, who are fighting. This is Spain versus probably the Criollo elite and who they can pick up around that. And then the royalists are doing the same. They're saying, okay, we're loyal to Spain. Who can we pick up around it? And everybody's moving back and forth. And the real fight here is who can bring a lot of these groups onto their side, before the other side can.
Yeah, I think we could have a whole episode on the social hierarchy of Spanish America under Spanish rule. Actually sounds like an interesting thesis that someone's probably done. But, all the groups that you just named. So, we've seen this story before if we look at the French Revolution. Not to generalize too much, but this idea of the third state immediately comes to mind. The vast majority of people are kind of stuck in their current social standing. They're probably lower income, but they represent a mass within the general population. So what does this mean for someone like Bolivar? He's going to have to balance the the demands of the lower classes while balancing, what I imagine would be the, terrifying fears of the elites of a third estate revolt that happens in Venezuela. So I think it does just kind of add to the powder keg that is potentially there for unification.
Yeah, and if we compare it to the United States of American Revolution, you definitely had more of a unified base of patriots, and especially from a racial standpoint. I wouldn't say it was just purely white and black because there's definitely more to that, but you didn't have this massive class of other people who had so much manpower for one that could really turn the tides based on who they aligned with. You didn't really have that. And so there's definitely reasons why certain things happen in America that aren't going to happen in Venezuela. But this is the big problem that they never are able to solve. And it always comes back and bites them in the butt. But before that, the first Venezuelan republic needs to die a very quick death. So we talked about it a little bit last time, but this earthquake that happens is huge because you have to remember the Spanish have come under Monteverde's forces and they're ready to attack and they're ready to take things back. But the royalists have been clever. They've teamed up with the church and they've said, look, these Republican revolutionaries, they are anti-God, they're atheists. You can't trust them. If you're one of them, you're against God. Come to our side. We have God on our side. And people are like, oh, I don't know. What am I going to do? Well, it's the 2-year anniversary of the revolution and it's Holy Thursday. This is a great day for celebration. Let's all go to church. Let's have a good time. Well, unfortunately, one of the worst earthquakes that Venezuela's ever seen hits on this very day. So think of the omen. One of the holiest days in the Catholic Church and one of the most important days in the history of this republic, this very short-lived republic, decimates the city. Thousands die in churches alone. 10,000 are dead across the city. And there's a quote here about some of the carnage that they see, but also how Bolivar's legend really grows at this point. So this person says, I left my house for the cathedral, and the earth began to shake with a huge roar. I saw the church of San Jacinto collapse on its own foundations. I climbed over the ruins and I entered. I immediately saw about 40 people dead or dying under the rubble. I climbed out again and I shall never forget that moment. On the top of the ruins, I found Don Simón Bolívar. He saw me and said, we will fight nature itself if it opposes us, and force it to obey.
That is powerful. That is very, very powerful. And the timing of it, right? I think we've said it a couple of times in a few episodes, but like just the chance of an earthquake on that day at that fateful time is just one of those things about history is just kind of leaves you awe-inspired.
Yeah, there's so many little things. And I was thinking back when we talked about Robert Clive and the East India Company and how they won one of their most important battles because they put tarps or some sort of covering over their gunpowder when it rained at night and the Indians didn't. And then they won the battle. Just little things like that seem trivial, but can change the world, really. Now, as much as this is a great propaganda story for Bolivar, this earthquake is a disaster for everybody, but more so the Republicans, because this is time for this republic to fall. So like we talked about last time, Miranda, there's a few battles that happen. One of them with Bolivar where a fort he's actually defending with a bunch of weapons falls to the Spanish. He's outnumbered by a crazy amount. And Miranda and the Venezuelan Republic go, well, this is over. We're going to surrender to the Spanish. And so what Bolivar does is he actually arrests Miranda, him and a few other revolutionaries, and hand him over to the British, or to the Spanish, I should say. And so as kind of all this chaos is happening, first off, I don't think we can go past the point that Bolivar just arrested Miranda. Like, these guys were not, I wouldn't say best friends, but definitely aligned in what they did. And there's a few reasons why he does this, but I'm not going to say it, just tell you what he did. I'm going to tell you about how he does it when he's talking to Monteverde, the Spanish general. So Bolivar realizes he can't stay in Venezuela. He needs to flee to exile. He needs to go into exile. The biggest question here, how the heck did he get out of Venezuela? Do you need a passport to leave? The Spanish control all the ports. You're not getting on a ship without a passport. So he actually goes to Monteverde with some people that he's got good relations with, who have good relations with the Spanish, and basically say, yeah, Monteverde's like, yeah, I'll give you a passport to get out. Here's why, because you did a good thing arresting Miranda. Thank you so much. Here's a reward. Here's a passport. And Bolivar, in his bravado, if you will, stands up and says, nope, I did it because he was a traitor. Nothing more. It has nothing to do with you as being loyal to Spain. And Monteverde goes, well, actually, about that passport, I'm not so sure I want to give it to you. And thankfully, a family friend jumped in and basically said, hey, kind of smooth things over. And he got a passport and he was able to get out of Venezuela, which is huge because now he's got the opportunity to regroup and everything. But I love Bolivar. He's got this golden opportunity because someone's making a really dumb decision and he almost blows it because, again, he's got to stand on his laurels and say, hey, this is who I am, and I don't care about you. I care about my country. I care about making it free. And Miranda was against it, and that's the reason I arrested him.
Yeah, it's a pretty incredible move. And we're talking around what, like 1814, 1815 here?
A little bit before that. So I think we're 1812. Yeah.
1812. Okay, got it. Yeah. So I was just looking here in terms of like what precedes that, or, what's going to happen shortly after. So the Republic's fallen. Right? Earthquake, Miranda's arrested. What happens now? So I came across this, it's called the War to the Death decree that he jumps into. And I think it's definitely worth mentioning from a contextual period. Paul, I'm pretty sure this probably came up in your research, but just contextually. So what are we saying right now? The First Republic's fallen. It's collapsed in 1812. Royalist forces, both Spanish-born and local loyalists, are massacring rebels and civilians alike. It's not a clean fight between two armies. Now it's it's a civil war layered with race, class, and revenge. And here's his decree.
So I think just before that, Richie, before we get to that, he leaves and then he comes back. So he does this manifesto first, because again, I love this. He leaves because he gets his passport and then he goes, oh yeah, here's my manifesto, basically saying the reason why the First Republic fell was a fatal adoption of the system of tolerance and a whole bunch of other things. But then he gets back to Venezuela, starts what he calls the admirable campaign, which is a hilarious way, but that's when this decree of the war to the death happens.
That's so interesting. So this is a part of the admirable campaign, the
admiral campaign. Yes, let's put that in everyone's ears right now, because this is the Admiral campaign, and the next line I have is the decree of the war to the death. So we'll see how that goes.
Great branding. So the quote goes, Spaniards and Canarians, trust me, you will die, even if you are neutral, unless you actively support American liberty. Americans, even if guilty, will be spared, which is just such a crazy statement, because what's he really saying? Anyone born in Spain is presumed guilty and marked for execution unless they join the patriot cause. This is so essentially he's pre-assuming anyone born in the Americas of any race or class is going to be forgiven, even if they had previously sided with the royalists. This is kind of like an authorization for total war, not just against soldiers, but civilians.
And it's even worse than just if you're Spanish, you're presumed guilty. It's even if you're neutral. So even if you're Spanish, you're like, I don't want any part of this. I just want to do what I do. Too bad. Off with your head. You are guilty. And I think that's the craziest part of all of this is it's a license to be absolutely murderous at this point. And this is the thing. We don't get into it a ton here, and I don't want to gloss over it. This entire period is incredibly violent, and it's so bad for the civilians, the soldiers, everybody who's involved. And I don't necessarily think it's not anybody's fault. It's not like, oh, Bolivar's, this war to the death isn't something he just thought up. It's definitely coming from what he's been seeing in this time of like, he thinks there needs to be some violence to get everybody on board. And you'll see with him his shift from, hey, we're a republic, everything's great, we'll get everybody to agree, to, I don't think these people being the people that he wants to rule, can do this without some sort of sword in their back or gun to their back. They need kind of hard leadership before they're going to be able to get in line. And I think this is kind of the first seed of that, where he doesn't necessarily believe that playing nice is really going to work. And he has to go, for the throat, really.
I was just doing some quick Googling because I think it is worth kind of underlining the violence in this particular period. So if we kind of bookmark this from like 1810 to 1823, like the Wars of Independence, it's estimated anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 deaths, which is pretty significant for the population of Venezuela at this time. So it is very broad in terms of its impact and in terms of just sheer violence. You have organized killing that's happening on like racial and social lines, mass killing of Spaniards, targeted racial and class-based violence. Yeah, it's a very violent, terrifying period.
And it's not just war, right? It's the breakdown of society, bandits running free. Like, kind of you get these cowboys too, which I think is a lot of fun. You get these guys who are riding shirtless on horseback who are doing what cowboys do, but you get the bandit versions of them. You get the honorable kind of classic cowboys as well. It's just a crazy time. And again, there's a million episodes we could do on this time period, but let's keep going with this war to the death. So he comes back into New Granada, which is more kind of on the Colombian side of the Venezuelan Colombians parts of South America. And he moves into Venezuela and very quickly is able to take back a lot of the land that he lost. He sweeps through the Andes and the plains, which I think is funny. You got these mountains and these kind of grasslands as well in this area. He's hailed as the Liberator, and he enters Caracas in 1813, and things are back, right? The Second Republic is created. The eastern part of Venezuela is controlled by someone named Santiago Marino, and he actually fought Monteverde in the east before and around the same time that Bolivar's doing this war to the death. And he's unwilling to subordinate himself to Bolivar. He doesn't want to say, yeah, I'll join with you. You're in charge. So they're kind of like not allies, but not enemies. They're just kind of in this weird, like it's complicated relationship status on Facebook, something like that. Like, we're not really sure what's going on there, but eventually they start to figure things out a little bit. But this royalist resistance does not end. It keeps coming, and it's not just exterior Spanish forces. It's coming from within the house this time. And this is where we just had the war to the death. We now have the Legion of Hell, and these guys are insane. So this is a private army led by someone named Jose Tomas Bove, and he's recruited thousands of these plains horsemen, many indigenous, mixed race, and formerly enslaved. And he himself is not a white guy. So this is this mixing of all these lower classes who are like, forget it. We're going to take matters into our own hand. And they are, and again, it's not just them, but they have a reputation for just being incredibly brutal, but loyal to the royalist movement. And there's a quote here from one historian who says, his infernal legion used to massacre all the whites in every town it encountered without distinguishing age or gender, whether they were Spanish or Creoles. These guys are serious. They are this, I really kind of think like the way they're described is like how the Romans would look at the Huns, right? This horde of horsemen rolling over the plains, murdering and doing whatever they want. Now, I think in this case, they're probably more ruthless, I think, than the Huns would have been in terms of, not more ruthless, I should say, but a little bit more of that terror element is more in there, where the Huns, I think, were a little bit more strategic in what they did. But this is a big, big challenge for Bolivar because these guys are very talented and they're very brutal and everybody's scared of them. So this is the Second Venezuelan Republic and the internal things that it has to deal with.
Yeah, this is a pretty infamous group, and I can just imagine, like, on the ground what the psychopathy of people who are dealing this would feel like. Here's a group composed of mainly Black, Indigenous, and like mixed race cowboys who are just massacring entire towns, beheading people, slaughtering communities, and they're known for just literally wreaking havoc and destroying anything they come through. Again, it just goes to show you the flavor of violence and war that's happening in Venezuela.
Yeah, and it gets worse because they're getting close to Caracas now, and there's these brutal counterattacks. There's so many internal rivalries. This is the thing. Like, there's just no stability. And eventually the Patriots and the Republican forces are defeated once again. And so by 1814, almost a year later, Caracas falls again. So the Second Republic has now fallen. And can you imagine the panic in this city? Who's coming? What are you going to do? You're white and you're in this city, and we see so many people flee with Bolivar and the troops trying to go east. Some go, some don't. Many are killed. It's not a good scene again. But again, this is this time period, right? So Bolivar is forced to flee Venezuela once again, going back into New Granada, which is modern day Colombia, which itself is also under threat. But thankfully for everybody, Bova is killed in a battle just before the Second Republic officially dies, but he's off the scene. That group kind of ends up getting almost more formally incorporated into the Spanish auxiliary military forces, if you will. But Bolivar's so frustrated at this point, he's like, okay, I got to get out of here. This is too insane. Probably my life is at risk. I need to kind of reset, recharge, and think of a plan of attack. So he resigns command and he sails to Jamaica in 1815 to seek support. So when he gets to Jamaica, this is where he writes his probably most famous of his political essays. And we mentioned a few of them already. And this is the classic Letter from Jamaica. And what I love about this, it's not him just writing it and publishing it. Someone asked him for his opinion and said, hey, can you give me an idea? Can you write me something about how things are going in Spanish America and kind of what you think needs to change for this Republican independence movement to happen? Bolivar goes, absolutely, I could write something like that. But he's clever. He knows, not that he knows, but he hopes that this is going to get published one day. And so he writes it, and in a very prophetic way where he's saying things like, we are moreover neither Indian nor European, but a species midway between the legitimate proprietors of his country and the Spanish usurpers. So he really starts to hit at this, we are a unique group of people who are neither Spanish nor indigenous. We are a new thing. And he really kind of goes after the kind of this elite in Venezuela saying, you're actually slaves of Spain. And so remember, bottom of that rung is the enslaved Africans. He's basically saying you're on the same level, in the same eyes as we see the Spanish king. And so that's a big piece, but he continues on. He looks at the United States of America and says, I don't really like their federalist system. I don't think it'll suit Latin America. He says it's too perfect. It requires virtues and political talents far superior to our own. So he's almost kind of looking at his people saying like, look, well, we can't do what they did. We're just not ready for this. We don't have the ability to do so. And he really predicts that a strong central authority will be needed to hold the nations together. But he cautions it and says, maybe if the state's too large, this could be costly and this could degenerate into tyranny where smaller republics maybe will be more stable, which eerily foreshadows what's going to happen with Gran Colombia later on, which I think is super interesting. But this is kind of the message that he's put out there, and it's starting to pick up traction, and people are starting to remember that they're not going to forget the name Simón Bolívar anytime soon, especially in this part of the world.
I don't want to call it his like opus dei, but like it's kind of like that in so many ways, right? The things he touches on in his letter are so far-reaching and so succinct at the same time, because it really kind of hammers home the point about the pretext that we laid at the onset of the episode. He's addressing the pitfalls of the current economic system, about being exploited, the political exclusion that's happening because of, that race-based society that they live in. I think it's also interesting how he is diagnosing different empires and how they got there to see how this experiment could work best in Spanish America. He's very much doing an analysis, but he's also providing his vision for the future while trying to unify a people and push the Spanish colonizers to the side. Like it's pretty impressive.
It's a lot for one man to do, right? And we'll see how that changes in the future. But just before he leaves Jamaica, there's one thing we got to mention. So he was living in this place, got in a fight with his landlady. We don't know the details, but basically says, I'm out of here. I'm going to go live somewhere else. That very next day, someone knocks at the door. It's a Venezuelan saying, hey, I'm looking for Simón Bolívar. House is empty. I thought he was going to be here. Well, I don't have anywhere to stay. So I'm going to jump in his hammock that he's got hung up in this place. And I'm going to sleep here tonight. Okay, fine. There should be nothing wrong with that. Middle of the night, he wakes up to multiple knives being driven into his chest and he's murdered. Now, why? Well, it's dark. The assassin didn't know who was in the bed or in the hammock, but he knows who was supposed to be living there. And that was Simón Bolívar. This is an assassination attempt that has gone wrong. If this was a day earlier, Simón Bolívar is dead. He's killed in his sleep, but this person who was doing the execution didn't realize it wasn't Simón Bolívar, and he realizes, oh my God, somebody's trying to to kill me. We don't know exactly who it is. It's probably someone on the royalist side. Who else would it be? But he gets out of Jamaica quickly, and he goes to Haiti to talk to his soon-to-be new allies in the new Haitian Republic, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, this is such an interesting pivot and shift in his story, because there's probably so much historical context that we could get into at this point, and probably deserves its own episode. But he is welcomed to Haiti by Haiti's president at the time, Alexandre Pétion. And this is a unique situation because this is the only, I guess, official independent state in Latin America at the time. And it is a nation of former slaves. So, there's an interesting cordial relationship that I imagine is going to form pretty quickly in terms of the Haitian experiment in Spanish America.
Definitely. And the support he gets from the Haitians has one condition: gotta free your slaves. That's the one condition. And Bolivar agrees. And I think from what we read about him, he's definitely an abolitionist. I don't think he necessarily was like gung-ho about it, but he definitely didn't believe that it was the right thing to do. And I think he understood the value of not having a slave economy and just having slaves in general. So it's something he's going to try, but again, he tries to keep his word, but this is something that takes a long time to fix. I believe it to this point, they banned new slaves from coming in, but any existing slaves or people born in Venezuela would still be enslaved. So he's coming back again. And this is where he is looking to take back the territories that he lost, but he's going to do a little bit more this time. So he sets up a base in Venezuela. He rebuilds his army. He's got a lot of these cowboys, which I think are cool. He's got this new lieutenant named Jose Antonio Paez, who becomes very key in this. And he's got a lot of foreign volunteers now. We get British and Irish veterans at this point, which I think is a lot of fun, just because why not? Why people from all over the world coming to this part of the world to help them fight, and also for looking for glory and money and those sort of things. But there are some stories around how few of them actually make it out and make it back home. Most dying of disease, because these tropical diseases really hampered the Europeans. So he comes back, helps create a provisional government in Venezuela because there's a little bit more support now. And again, this is the thing. Sometimes he can just walk in. Sometimes he needs to fight his way in. It's a crazy time period. And so he lays out his principles for these new nations. He's advocating for strong but democratic central government and the abolition of old privileges. We need equality, to recast into a single whole the classes of man, political opinions, and customs, urging the need to end slavery and nobility. Very classic Enlightenment thinking. And this really sets the tone for what he's trying to do. So great, but this has been tried before. The white elites don't want this. The royalists don't want this, but he's got enough street cred, if you will. There's enough support around him where this is starting to stick a little bit more. And now he's going to start to get some military victories. And this is where he does some really bold stuff. In 1819, he does this daring exploit where he goes across the Andes Mountains in some pretty horrible winter and basically catches the Spanish completely off guard. They were really at this point declining because they really stopped recruiting from the local populace. They were really concerned about let's just bring in more Spanish people who are from Spain, who we are loyal. But like I mentioned, so many die off because of disease. They're not recruiting very well. And the Spanish army is starting to get weaker. So they win this decisive battle and they roll into Bogota, and the city is completely shocked because about 12 hours ago, there's this army coming. We got no issues. We're going to deal with them quickly. Oh yeah, some reports are coming back. The battle's gone well. Nothing's no issue. 12 hours later, here comes Bolivar and his army. And just like that, Venezuela and modern day Colombia are now back under Bolivarian and whatever we want to call this. It's going to become Gran Colombia soon, but it's under his control.
It's pretty incredible, right? The crossing of the Andes again. It's one of those like historical moments in time. Like it just like the crossing of the Alps that you just don't really know about if you aren't familiar with the history. Maybe it's not popularized as much, but very, very risky maneuver, right? We're talking about waist deep bogs, scaling 13,000 foot passages where obviously a lot of people are going to die or fall or get injured, but it works. The risk pays off. And I think it's so easy just to kind of glean over that. But if it doesn't pay off, again, maybe the story's done there.
Yeah, there's a lot of this. And I love the Hannibal reference. It's very similar to Hannibal. It's very daring and it's catching people off guard, and I think that's pretty cool. But you have so many people who are kind of very loyal to him at this point, who are willing to do this. And you get this, and you start to get that like Julius Caesar with that legion of like that connection. You're starting to see a lot of very loyal people to him and some great generals and some great leaders starting to come out of this. But now New Granada is freed. And so Bolivar pushes to formalize a union with Venezuela. So it takes a little bit of time. So it starts in late 1819, but by early 1821, a constitution to form the Republic of Colombia is created. So it was called Colombia back then, but we today call it Gran Colombia just to differentiate it from the current country of Colombia. So we'll continue to call it Gran Colombia going forward. And this federation encompassed Venezuela, most of modern Colombia, and Panama, and will soon include Ecuador as well. So Bolivar is elected the first president, and his trusted friend Francisco Santander becomes vice president, and he's going to be a key figure as we go along as well. And so, all right, Bolivar's dream of a united Spanish America seems to be taking shape, but it's not that easy because in theory, everything should be great now. The Spanish are gone for the most part. They've been defeated. What's there to lose? This is what they wanted. Let's grow this into this Gran Colombia, this great country. But he goes back to Venezuela and he already starts to see problems. He's got infighting with his generals. One general pulled out a bunch of royalist POWs and executed them publicly. And Bolivar's like, what are you doing? We need these guys on our side. We don't have the royalists on our side. Why are you going and executing people? And so, but he can't just go reprimand the general too hard because he needs his support. And people are worried, like, if he takes out that general, what's he going to do to me? There's even reports of Bolivar's death. And so there was a small mutiny against Santander. They made him step down. Then Bolivar shows up and they're like, oh, so sorry, Santander. We were just kidding. Go back. And so he has to kind of play this like, all right, guys, I'm not going to be ruthless, but like, what are you doing? Slap you on the wrist. Let's move on. And then the biggest thing is he hasn't seen his mistress in years because, again, he never remarried, but he's taking lovers, if you will. He can't find her. He doesn't know where she is. He's got people looking for her, all these things. And then the news comes back that she had actually died while he was away on campaign. So again, just it's a lot on him. And I think the key thing with Bolivar, if we're going to put himself in his shoes and in his head, and we saw it, like saying, we can't do what America does because there's something crazy about us and our group of people. You'll start to see the frustration and the disappointment in his own people and the lack of confidence that this thing can actually work. He's not there yet, but these are just little things that I think are going to be important, as we go along. But things are going to continue to grow and be good for a little bit, but you can start to see the seeds of, this isn't going to maybe be as easy as he thought.
Well, and I think that's the important point too, right? Like, I think, I don't want to say the writing's on the wall, but there is a lot of problems already kind of becoming apparent. It's very large. It's very divided on ideological lines. Again, there's loyalties on both sides of the spectrum still. There's political infighting between those social classes that are still deeply embedded in society. Bolivar is going to take a bit of a authoritarian kind of approach to consolidate power, but that obviously risks alienating people. And I think to underpin all of this, those institutions aren't there to hold it together, right? There is no structure that is kind of going to bond these diverse populations together under this unified banner. And I think those are kind of the key challenges he's going to contend with.
Yeah, and it comes back to this centralism problem as well. He wants a strong central government, and the provincials say, no, I want control over my own province. And I think, again, back to the United States, the United States did very well with giving states a certain amount of autonomy and not just hammering over the head with everything that came out of Washington. And it was that kind of balancing of those. And we don't really see that here, at least in the same way. But Bolivar's not finished yet. And I think if he stopped here, maybe things could have been better for him, but he wants to free as much of Spanish America as he can. So what he starts by doing is him and his General Paez crush the last Spanish army in June 1821, like really cementing that Venezuelan independence. But then they move south and he dispatches the brilliant general who's with the last name Sucre to liberate Ecuador, and he does that, and he's a legend in Ecuador today, and ends up being Bolivar's most trusted and talented general. So that happens. Then that summer, he personally meets with General Jose de San Martin, who's a liberator of Argentina and Chile, and they meet in Ecuador. And this private meeting, Santander cedes Bolivar of the task of completing the liberation of Peru. So San Martin pulls away. Bolivar goes in, finishes off the Spanish in Peru, and things are looking good. But there's some challenges here, and we'll get into the details in a second. But remember, war is expensive. At this point, 25% of Gran Colombia's finances are going to funding the war. So that's big. You're also seeing money secured in loans overseas, and they're showing up with less than they agreed, or the money's completely disappearing. So this rampant corruption that they haven't figured out yet, the big tariffs and state monopolies, it's not necessarily clear if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but there's just a lot of instability that's happening at this point. But Bolivar keeps pushing forward. He wins Peru, helps them become independent. He puts Sucre in charge, and he wins this one battle at the Battle of Ayacucho. And he says, this battle is the summit of American glory, and it is the work of General Sucre. So, which is great. He's saying, hey, it's not just me, it's people around me. As Waterloo decided Europe's fate, Ayacucho has decided the destiny of South America. And this is really when the Spanish are pretty much finished at this point. So Peru is now free. The neighboring territory of Upper Peru was also liberated and was named Bolivia. And so if you're making the connection, that sounds very familiar. You're absolutely right. They declared, if from Romulus, Rome, from Bolivar, it is Bolivia, and offered him the presidency of Bolivia.
President for life as well, which is interesting. It's always fascinating when we talk about these Enlightenment individuals, some of the juxtaposition of theory and practice and how these things come to life. But obviously, I think this says a lot about the way that he thought this particular flavor of revolution and self-governance was going to work. So it's not a slight against him, but it's just interesting, some of these tensions that we find when we look at how Enlightenment ideals actually translate post-revolution.
Yeah, and they all kind of have this, like, I want to be a Roman emperor, I feel deep down, even though they don't. They love the Republic, but come on, being an emperor would be awesome. And I think that's kind of what you see sometimes with these guys. So he does serve briefly as their president. He helps draft a constitution, like you said, president for life. And it really reflects his belief for a strong executive. And he actually does, it's not Peru that Sucre is in charge of. It's actually Bolivia that he's in charge of here. So it's 1825. Simón Bolívar is at his peak. Fame, power, everything. He's president of Gran Colombia. He's president of Peru and was for Bolivia for a time until he kind of delegated power. So people are saying this guy is the South American George Washington. He kind of likes that. He's like, yeah, I got all these countries and there's a bunch of challenges that I've got, but yeah, this is going well. So in theory, he's done what he needs to do. He's unified Spanish America under one banner. Should be good, right? As we've been foreshadowing. It's not even close. So he basically brings everybody to this Congress of Panama in 1826. He invites all these new Latin American republics to form a league or a confederation. So he's got the idea in his head that this is kind of going to be like if we look at the Soviet Union. You had all these Soviet republics, kind of had some level of autonomy, but still reported up into Moscow. There's an element of that here, obviously not on that exact model, but this system where they're going to have some level of autonomy, but wasn't really done in a great way in the sense that everybody was really happy. But this is his vision. And, you know, it's come together and it's looking on paper, at least, like it's going to come together, but in practice, it just really doesn't. So he's really struggling to govern these vast territories, but he firmly believed that only strong centralized authority could hold these fragmented groups together, especially given all these geographic distances, political factions. For example, after a few years, Peru's like, hey, we love being Peruvian. Why are all these Colombians here? Why are they in our country? I don't want to be Colombian. Get rid of these guys. And so you start to see these things, right? And so this is where Bolivar really starts to be more of, is he a president or is he a dictator? Because he really wants that control. And so as all of these things are happening, he's really starting to grab onto power. And so a historian named John Lynch says Bolivar really believed that this is not the best system of government, but I just need something that works. And for him, it's being more autocratic and being seen almost as a dictator. And now this is creating even more problems because the people who came up with him on liberal principles, they're not happy either. But in his mind, he's like, I can't control all these people unless I have ultimate control. And this is where that's kind of hanging the balance.
It's a very interesting period in world history, the 1820s. And it's probably a footnote that I think will apply to the broader context, but I do think it's worth mentioning. And it brings in someone we haven't really talked about all that much. It's the US and the Monroe Doctrine. And I'll keep it as short and simple as I can. But essentially, it's issued in 1823. It's essentially a warning to Europe. No new colonies, no meddling in the Americas. It really is showcasing a shift in global influence towards the West. And, you know, not to foreshadow so much, but it gets abused later in the 20th century with a lot of American intervention in the so-called unification ventures of South America. But, you know, under the broader context of what's going on, like political and global hegemony is shifting towards the West, and Europe is no longer kind of competing for this theater anymore.
Yeah, and it should be great, right? All the external factors are gone. The U.S. is a little too far away to have a super big impact. This should be great. But in 1826, Bolivar says, I am convinced to the very marrow of my bones that America can only be ruled by able despotism. We are the vile offspring of the predatory Spaniards, later the illegitimate offspring of those unions joined with slaves from Africa. With such racial mixture and such a moral record, can we afford to place laws above leaders and principles above men? So he is not positive about anything. He's basically saying, if I don't do this, this is going to turn into a disaster. And he's already starting to see the people who are kind of in his liberal corner are becoming more radical. And he's like, we're going to get turned into another Haiti, because they're seeing Haiti kind of as this slave uprising, and it's not a very successful country, despite the fact they helped them out. So maybe be nice to the Haitians. You wouldn't really be where you are maybe without them. But almost immediately, Gran Colombia is in big trouble. There's so many rivalries, regional, personal, everything you can imagine. Venezuelans, New Grenadans, Ecuadorians fighting about where power should reside. And so Santander, his vice president, is really fighting for this liberal federalism and rule of law from Bogota, which is clashing with Bolivar's centralist, more despotism type of style. And, it gets to the point where Paez, one of his trusted generals, actually resents orders from Bogota, and he wants autonomy because he's out kind of in the provinces. Economic troubles are crushing Gran Colombia at this point, and we talked about how much money they were spending on war. Their economy just can't compete with this global power from Europe, and starting from the United States is very difficult. And so by 1826, rebellions are breaking all over the place. In 1827, Bolivar has to personally intervene to appease discontent in Caracas. He found himself increasingly torn between factions in the north and his obligations in Peru and Bolivia. Clashes over Santander's handling of finances actually caused a break between the two and actually turned into open conflict. So again, this is the big thing. The friends and people who are loyal to him, he's fighting with, and he's losing them. Not necessarily because it's his fault. It's just they're not getting along. Their ideas are different, and things just aren't going well. And so he actually submits his resignation from the president of Colombia in 1827, which the Congress declines. But the Colombian soldiers garrison in Lima, which is in Peru, they mutiny and arrest the Venezuelan officers. They occupy one of the cities, and this allows Bolivar's opponents in Peru to depose him as president and repeal his constitution. So you can just start to see this is not unified in any sense of the imagination. Colombians don't trust Venezuelans, who don't trust Peruvians, who don't trust provincials in Venezuela. It's just so fractured that you can see where this is going. It's just a death by 1,000 cuts, and it's continuing to continue on. And just to quickly kind of go through and wrap up kind of this piece before we get into the inevitable assassination attempt. It's 1828. Political crisis has peaked. There's so many issues with trying to get a new constitution done. This is when Bolivar actually says, I am taking dictatorial powers. I need to save this. Don't worry, it's just temporary. The Romans did it all the time with having a dictator that we were going to roll back to. We do it, we'll be fine. But this annoyed a lot of people. Former allies are saying, hey, this is not what we signed up for. And this opposition to Bolivar really intensifies, especially amongst liberals in New Granada, which is, modern day Colombia.
The writing's kind of on the wall at this point, right? It has to be. I know we're not at the assassination attempt yet, but I think it's such an interesting case study again in revolutions, because we covered so many at this point. But this whole, I'm only going to be dictator just for a little bit until we calm things down. And then, things will be okay. We'll return back to normal. I don't think we've seen it work yet, or at least not work as well as those implementing it think it's going to.
Yeah, and I don't blame him for it either. I don't think it's a bad decision based on how messed up things are. But at the same time, it doesn't look good optically. I know you think you can fix everything. Sometimes I'm like, Simón, just take it easy. You're trying to do too much. And again, let Peru and Bolivia go. Focus maybe just on Venezuela. Focus on Gran Colombia in that sense. But he's trying to do a lot, and this is where this assassination attempt comes in. So it's September 25th, 1828. Dissenters in Bogota, allegedly with support of Vice President Santander, who, clever, he kind of leaves the country during this time to make it seem like nothing's going on. But basically, there's a whole bunch of planning. Apparently 150 people were involved, but only a handful showed up on the night. The rest chickened out. And basically what happens is they storm into the presidential palace, and his essentially lover, mistress, if you will, probably almost deserves her own episode. She's very interesting. Her name's Manuela Sainz. And she basically says, she can hear the commotion. She's like, this is it. This is the assassination attempt, because she's been telling him for weeks that she knows this is coming because she's hearing things and he doesn't believe it. She's like, no, this is it. It's happening right now. So Bolivar grabs his sword. He waits at the door. She's like, are you nuts? there's a group of armed men who are coming up the stairs who want to kill you, and you're going to try to fight them? Get out of here. So he goes, all right, yeah, you're probably right. So he jumps out the window, only on the second floor, so he's okay. Don't worry. Runs basically through the streets, finds someone who he trusts, and they essentially hide under a bridge while this friend is kind of relaying messages back and forth. And so I just want you to picture this. It's a cold night. He's not wearing proper clothing because he's just been sitting in bed. He's freezing. And if his leadership has fallen apart politically at this point, his soul is broken at this point. His body is already broken. And at this point too, he's been sick for a lot of years. Everything is just breaking away. And I can just imagine him sitting under that bridge going, oh my God, it's over. Everything I've worked for is over in this moment, because even if I come back from this, I think he just feels so broken in his soul more than even just his body.
Yeah, what does it symbolize ultimately, right? Like, it's that dream of Republican unity just kind of going down the drain, and a potential backlash for kind of his authoritarian tendencies, and even at a personal cost, how much he's had to do and take on to hold together what I'd call a fracturing revolution at this point.
Yeah, it's over at this point. So the vision of unity is collapsing here. Venezuela, led by Paez, again, former friend and ally, formally secedes from Gran Colombia. So Venezuela's out. Ecuador soon follows suit. We're kind of back to where we started, but no Spanish involved this time. And now local strongmen and politicians in Bogota starting to look at Bolivar and go, I'm not so sure about this guy. And so basically gets to the point where, he's so sick too at this point. We think it's tuberculosis. He's been defeated again. He goes, all right, I'm out of here. I will resign the presidency and I'm going to go to exile to Europe. And so it's about early 1830 at this point. So he gets to the sea and he's looking for a ship to take him. But again, he's really sick. So he can't just go on any ship. He has to find the right ship that's got enough space to kind of make sure that he can stay comfortable while he's at sea. And it's even a risk to travel at this point. And he's just kind of doing this waiting game. One of the worst things of all of this, his mistress is back in Bogota, Manuela, and she's sending him messages, trying to get him up to speed of what's going on. He finds out that Sucre has actually been assassinated at this point. So he thought when he dies, Sucre would take over after him. He goes, this is a great man. But Sucre is he's even a step back from Bolivar. You see him actually try to just retire full out. He goes to Bolivar. I'm done with all of this. I don't want to lead any of these countries anymore. I don't want to be a general. This is essentially so messed up. He thinks he's going to get assassinated, and eventually he does, which is really sad. And you got to just remember, picture Bolivar. He's sitting on the coast. He's just getting all this terrible news. His body's breaking apart. His mind is breaking. Maybe not his mind so much, but his soul is breaking apart of what the heck just happened? And then he gets that knock at the door. Simón, we need you back. We've ousted the people who ousted you, and we think you're the man for the job. And he goes, I can't do it. My body is broken, and I am done with all of this. And so in that time, he does a lot of writing, and he says, America is ungovernable for us. Those who serve a revolution plow the sea. The only thing to do in America is emigrate. This country will inevitably fall into the hands of uncontrollable masses and then into the hands of petty tyrants. And so this whole plowing the sea thing is kind of this famous quote from him of you're laboring intensely against the chaos of the waves, but it does nothing. You're just working and working and working, but the machine around you, nature around you is going to take over. And so eventually it gets to the point where this TB takes over his body and he eventually dies. And he says kind of one of the last things that he says is, if my death contributes to the end of partisanship and consolidation of the Union, I shall go peacefully to my grave. And so he dies on December 17, 1830 at the age of 47 from tuberculosis in Santa Maria, Colombia, not being able to, go into exile. And the other thing too is he's dirt poor. And people are starting to realize he didn't really take a lot of money and he wasn't very corrupt. He kind of just died poor, which people were like, oh boy, maybe we should have been a little bit nicer to him, because I think, he's not corrupt like a lot of these people. But to just kind of wrap up, this is the end of Simón Bolívar. And it's a sad ending for Latin America, because the history of Latin America for at least the rest of this century, and we even see it into the 20th century, is consistent changing in leadership, assassinations, and a lack of stability in this part of the country. And so as much as things ended poorly for Simón Bolívar and he didn't do what he was able to do, I think he recognized the machine that was what was happening in Latin America, that it was going to take some time for some stability. And I hate that he dies with this taste in his mouth, but at the end of the day, it was a pretty apt assessment of, I think what the next few decades and maybe the rest of that century is really going to look like for a lot of that part of the world.
Yeah, he definitely had some political foresight, especially with like the mention of the Monroe Doctrine and, U.S. interventionism in South American affairs later on in the 20th century. Yeah, I think history would look very different. The world would look very different today if he was successful in a unified South America. The implications of that are pretty far-reaching, and it's sad he wasn't able to accomplish it, but I think he also had a lot of, it was a grand challenge to accomplish on his own without any external support while having all the internal strife. But I think he is still remembered and revered as a hero, a national hero for many in South America, and I think his story is fascinating. The fact that he died penniless but started his life extremely wealthy and elite is a very sad kind of contrast. He literally did give everything to the vow that he made.
Yeah, I think he deserves, he is in the pantheon in Venezuela, like that's where he's buried. He deserves to be seen in that way by the people of South America and those countries today, just based on the fact that you're right. He sacrificed everything in his life. He lost so much to try to do what he did. But at the same time, I think he just bit off too much at the same time. And he understood it all. That was the interesting thing. He knew exactly how this was going to end. He called it, but he kept going. And I think it was just if I can just get the Spanish out and I can put this liberal movement across more of South America, everything's going to be great. And it didn't really work out. But I was just thinking back to how we ended the episode on Miranda. And there was a great quote from a historian named Karen Racine. And she said, Miranda was an American patriot who didn't understand America. I think it's the opposite with Bolivar. He's definitely an American patriot, but he's understood America probably better than anybody in terms of what he had to deal with and essentially what the future was going to hold, post him and, the Gran Colombian experiment.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to wrap it up.
Definitely. So yeah, thank you all so much. I hope you all enjoyed our journey into Venezuelan independence. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening to this episode of the History in Motion podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, follow and leave a review. It helps others discover the stories that shaped our world.